It's time now to check out the state of the states when it comes to marijuana law. It's an issue like same-sex marriage that the Beltway won't touch, but states are addressing head-on. Only 2 states, Washington and Colorado, allow adults to use marijuana recreationally. They are now grappling with how to run a system that is counter to federal law. Another 17 states, mostly in the West and Northeast, allow marijuana for medical use. An effort in Maine to extend medical marijuana to all adults is picking up steam now. A bill to allow possession of up to 2.5 ounces and tax the drug at $50 per ounce made it out of a legislative committee just yesterday. In Colorado, the state's Medical Marijuana Enforcement Division is getting low marks as it transitions to drop the medical from its name. Lawmakers are up in arms over an audit that found it plagued by low funding, poor oversight, and a slow permitting process. I'm sure the funding and permitting would pick up if you could just use pot to shoot bullets. To find out the state of the country's patchwork of marijuana laws, we turn to David Downs. David covers the evolving marijuana laws as the editor of the Smell the Truth blog. Welcome inside the War Room, David.
Thanks for having me, Michael.
So, David, how is the Colorado experiment going right now? What's the state of the experiment?
I think it's fair to call it growing pains. Yeah. You know, the Department of Revenue started the Medical Marijuana Enforcement Division just a couple years ago, and they've seen fluctuating budgets, as well as the realities of enforcing policy differ widely from what it looked like on the paper.
Yeah. So when you say they're having growing pains, this is all new terrain for everyone. So people are just kind of feeling out how it's going to work.
We're talking about daylighting a black market industry, and the Department of Revenue has experience doing that in Colorado with gambling. And so, you know, when the way they did it with gambling, they thought I'd give it over to them, and now it's going to take some time to put together.
So is Washington State facing the same difficulties as Colorado?
Washington is even earlier along in the process. They just hired their their marijuana consultant, Mark Kleiman, and he's going to be helping them outline exactly how to run their production, distribution, transportation, the whole thing, set taxes.
Yeah, and he comes from California. He's a UCLA
professor.
What is that role? Is that role going to happen or exist in each of the 50 states, or is this something that because there's no oversight, they're just trying to figure a good way out of doing it?
Yeah, I mean, they really are in uncharted territory as a state, and Kleiman represents probably the best of the breed in terms of knowledge about the interaction between the market and policy and ways to prevent some unintended consequences.
Well, let's look at some of the other states as well. According to the Legalization Advocacy Group, Marijuana Policy Project, there are 8 states from New Hampshire to Hawaii that could follow the path to legalization for adults. What sort of roadblocks do these proponents have to overcome?
Many of them are institutional. You're going to see in the Maine case significant issues being raised in the Senate, as well as, you know, in New York, you're seeing a medical marijuana bill that died in the Senate last year, and a new one that's starting right now is going to face more roadblocks in the Senate. You're dealing with powerfully entrenched interests that have spent, 70 years enforcing drug policy, and any changes to marijuana law moves some people's cheese around the board.
Right, and we hear that the Justice Department is going to weigh in on this in one way or another soon, but soon has never been defined. What do you expect? I mean, just as a guess or a hunch, Eric Holder's next move is going to be with regards to states like Colorado and Washington?
The scuttlebutt is that they could sue to prevent the implementation of those programs, and that lawsuit could end up in front of the Supreme Court the way the DOMA situation has.
Yeah, you bring up the DOMA situation. I'm glad you did. Gay marriage is another big state versus, the people issue, or state versus federal issue. A recent Quinnipiac poll shows that marijuana legalization has more support than same-sex marriage, and we've heard about all these same-sex marriage support at an age levels up to 65 years and older. It's as high as 67% in younger voters. So why is marijuana lagging behind same-sex marriage and becoming legal at the state level if this popularity actually has it ahead?
That's a great question. It comes down to values for a certain amount of people. To a certain degree, being soft on crime or soft on drugs will really hold up politicians in a way that we're not seeing with the gay rights issue. Like some of your other correspondents mentioned earlier, politicians are flipping left and right on this. But you're going to see the politicians lead from behind, if they lead at all, with regard to marijuana law reform.
And is that's interesting? I always think of this as always first of all, it was a political hot button to say you'd even tried pot. Now that seems to be an accepted, almost a normal thing for someone running for office. But when you say the politicians are going to be lagging behind or leading from behind, how soon do you think it's going to be politically expedient to say that you favor marijuana legalization?
Well, I mean, you can look at here in California, where you have Representative Tom Ammiano, who represents San Francisco, who's a vociferous advocate in the California legislature. But even he says that here in California, the majority of his fellow lawmakers are, quote, afraid of their own shadow with regard to changing marijuana law. So try to imagine this situation playing out in South Dakota or any deeply red state, and you can just imagine how hard it's going to be.
Of course, yeah. And you know what's compelling, too, is this whole idea of taxing. They're going to tax so heavily this marijuana. How soon will it be so taxed that people are just going to start going back to the black market and buying their pot the way they have forever?
Well, that's something Kleiman's really going to struggle with in Washington. Marijuana is widely available in this country. 10th graders, like 71% of them, report easy or very easy access to it. The most common price Americans pay for marijuana is zero.
Right.
It's gifted to them by friends. So any type of taxation above and beyond the actual cost to produce is going to run into the reality on the street, where pot's widely available and pretty cheap.
Right. I love when 10th graders are the demographic that people are talking about. It's just, so 10th grade, we polled 10th graders. I think we've over-polled when we're at 10th grade.
Well, yeah, I mean, everyone talks about keeping this drug away from kids, and that's why how they're against these changes to laws. And it's important to remember that for decades, the drug's been widely available.
Yeah, well, the blog is called Smell the Truth. David Downs, thanks so much for these insights. It is not just as simple as, okay, you can have recreational pot. There's so many layers to this. Appreciate you for helping us figure that out. Up next.